Luckily, Sean and myself are technical, so we like to do demos as well. So we'll have some demos for you to showcase the product as well, live demos, I might add, because, well, we really like to show you the product, not only talk about it through slides, right? As for a really quick introduction, Sean, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Sean Lambert. I'm a Senior Specialist Solutions Architect with AWS. I've been working with VMware Cloud on AWS now for just over 5 years, and just really excited to be with you all today. Appreciate you all joining.
Awesome. And I am Niels Ahoort, coming to you from the Netherlands. So depending on where you reside, if that's the US, I'm across the pond. If you're in Europe, well, on the same side here. Happy to talk to you about this topic. We've been showing real life workload migrations to customers. It always strikes them how easy it is, and we'll show you how easy it is. A couple of quick things. I mentioned the poll. Again, if you're looking to answer some questions there, that would be highly appreciated. Also, we have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, we have some folks here joining that can answer some Q&A as we go along. Without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, for those not familiar, VMware Cloud on AWS. This is a jointly engineered service that we, VMware by Broadcom, co-developed with AWS. And there's a couple of things to unravel in this slide. First of all, we're running on top of AWS. It's just the vSphere SDDC, software-defined data center. So your beloved vSphere ESXi hypervisor directly running on top of EC2 nodes, bare metal nodes. We have vSAN. We have the ability to scale independently with NFS data stores. We have NSX. All of that we have, and that feels very similar to what we are used to running on-prem, being it VCF, being it vSphere Cloud Foundation. So there is this operational consistency between the two. And because it is just vCenter server with vSphere ESXi, we really easily, we have the ability to really easily migrate workload from on-prem into VMware Cloud on AWS. While we are running on top of AWS infrastructure, that comes with a ton of possibilities as well and advantages. Think about connecting directly into AWS services, right? And reaching your application with AWS services. Sean will actually showcase or talk to how that works with a specific customer story on that end as well. So we'll have that a little bit later on in this presentation. But also think about the global reach that we have and our customers can benefit from. If you have a company residing in the US, but you need something like a local SDDC, a local infrastructure in Australia, for example, you can easily do so. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because when we talk about large scale and global reach, that is where this slides come into play, where you see the regions, the AWS regions that we have enabled for VMware Cloud on AWS today. So we started off back in 2017, where we started off in the US West, US East, quickly moved over to EMEA and APJ. And we're not stopping here, right? So we already have a couple of planned regions as well. Think about the Middle East. There will be another region in the Middle East. We're looking to enable another region in Europe, in Spain, to be precise. So a lot of global reach. And customers have the freedom and choice to where they want to run. Each and every region comes with its own regional regulations. So compliancy, security, all very important and top of mind, obviously. You see some listed here on the lower end. We support Golf Cloud for our US-based customers. So all of this, I'll share you a link later on in this slide deck, where you can find all the information about security compliancy, but also all the typical information for VMware Cloud on AWS. Now, I quickly wanted to highlight some of the things that we have done with IDC and Forrester Consulting that talk to VMware Cloud on AWS and its potential to have a far lower TCO when compared to traditional data centers. Now, I won't go into details. We have an extensive blog post detailing all of these metrics. This is for traditional data centers. We have done studies compared to native cloud and why VMware Cloud on AWS is such a good fit. So same QR code as the previous slide, that'll take you to the blog. But if you go to the resources tab of Zoom here, these case studies are also found there. So either QR or in the resources tab, and you should be good to go if you want to learn more about this. Now, another quick introduction that I wanted to do is the new instance type. So we used to have the i3 instance type, right? We have the i3EN instance type, which is a little bit heavier on the storage capacity side of things. We have i4i, which is for a lot of customers the go-to instance type with a lot of compute power. We have now a new so-called disaggregated instance type, the M7i metal. And it is an interesting one because we see a lot of use cases for this instance type with entry-level SDDCs. Think about 2 to 4 host SDDCs where you don't have local NVMe. That is the big difference with this instance type and the other instance types that we have. This comes with no local NVMe, so no vSAN. Customers need to set up an NFS storage option. So either Cloudflex storage or Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. Now, this is great because they can actually scale exactly to the amount, for example, with FSx, to the amount of storage capacity and performance that customers need for their specific workload. So you see some initial regions that will support as of today, last week, I should say. And another interesting thing that I wanted to call out is the latest and greatest Intel Xeon processors, so the Sapphire Rapids. This comes with built-in accelerators for AI and ML workloads. So if you think about training or inference workloads, that sits very well on this instance type as well. Like I mentioned, in the resources page or in the link later, shared later on, you'll find all the information about all the other instance types as well. But this is new, generally available right now, so I wanted to quickly highlight that. Now, let's move into architecting cloud transformation. Fancy title, what it really is. How do we move from an on-prem situation into VMware Cloud on AWS as easy and fast as possible, right? There's a lot of things to consider. The actual migration, I would argue, we can show you in a bit in the demo, is pretty easy, but there's obviously stuff that you need to think about up front. So what we typically say to customers, a solid architecture equals a solid migration. And that makes sense, I think, for everybody here working in IT. Whenever we start to look into migrating into VMware Cloud on AWS, in this case, we need to assess workloads. We need to understand what we're working with. What is the infrastructure landscape, right? Ideally, we have a clear view of all the application dependencies, right? What an application typically has multiple VMs on the background, might be an application or web front end, database backend, you name it. How do we get a clear understanding on the dependencies? What virtual machines talk to each other for a specific application? Obviously, we need to identify requirements, risks, assumptions, constraints. We need to think about sizing and how to actually do the migrations. Once we have thought about all of that, we need to move ahead to prepare and migrate the to-be infrastructure. So we set up VMware Cloud on AWS. We deploy our SDDCs. Might not even be in one specific region, might be multiple regions, might be multiple SDDCs within a region, might be multiple clusters within an SDDC. There's tons of options to think about. You need to think about network connectivity. How do I set that up? What migration considerations do I have? And once migrated, how do I test and verify that everything is working? All of that stuff. Now, once we have migrated into VMware Cloud on AWS, the work doesn't stop there, obviously. We can think about how to operate and automate the workloads running on top of VMware Cloud on AWS. And again, there are some things to unravel here. We'll go in each and every topic a little bit more in depth, but day 2 operations, right? How to now modernize my workloads once they are migrated into VMware Cloud on AWS. Can I use AWS native services like I already mentioned, right? We have Tanzu, which is part of your subscription. Maybe I want to modernize using Tanzu. All of that stuff we need to think about. But first, let's take a little bit of a closer look into the discover and design phase here. So like I mentioned, we have our infrastructure landscape, and we need to think about sizings and how this translates into VMware Cloud on AWS. So typically we see steps like these. We define the migration sources. Might not only be virtual machines, might be still some physical hosts that we have running, some bare metal hosts that we also want to migrate. We need to discover all of the applications, like I mentioned, collect hardware details of my current state in my on-prem situation, performance data as well, because it is interesting. You can map exactly the resources that you have right now and create SDDCs in VMware Cloud on AWS to match that. But what we really want to do is get an understanding how much of those compute and storage network resources are actually used versus just moving everything one-on-one. We want the cloud, the VMware Cloud on AWS infrastructure to be running as efficient as possible. That is why it's so important to have everything inside what is listed here. Identifying dependencies between VMs, ARIA can really help on that front with Network Insight, for example. There's some options there to really get a clear understanding what is happening. Once you have that, we now have our cloud migration scope, if you will. And one of the first steps would be to get a most optimized SDDC configuration. Like I mentioned, the VMware Cloud on AWS thrives if you really have an efficient way of sizing. Same goes for any IT infrastructure, and VMware Cloud on AWS is no different, right? Luckily, we have some toolings out there for you that really helps with these exercises. So it's removing the guesswork, I always say, right? So we have vmcsizer.vmware.com, or the QR code here. It's just an online tool that you feed with data, the data we just discussed. And you can configure it that you calculate your SDDC configuration, the output, against a specific instance type, for example. But I do want to call out something that we're working on, not available just yet, but it's coming, which is our auto mode. Basically feeding Sizer all of the metrics we just talked about, and it'll output what instance type fits your business requirements best. So that is really making it easy for our customers to see, okay, this workloads, this SDDC probably sit best on M7i instances. The other one might be on i4i, right? So really helping customers to get an understanding of how sizing looks like. It supports third-party tooling like RV Tools as well, where you can just export a CSV file, feed it into Sizer, and it'll help you to get a clear understanding on how the SDDC sizing on VMware Cloud on AWS should look like. Now, there's some other stuff, obviously, and again, not unique to VMware Cloud on AWS, but these are some of the things that you might want to think about whenever migrating into VMware Cloud on AWS. Think about availability, your business requirements, security. How do I map my SLA that I have within my company to VMware Cloud on AWS? Those technical requirements, we just talked about availability. We have the possibility to create stretch clusters with the click of a checkbox, right? And stuff like that. We need to think about manageability, scalability as well. That is one of the key aspects of VMware Cloud on AWS. You can really easily have a policy approach to scaling out or scaling in your SDDCs. And obviously risks and constraints, assumptions. We mentioned a couple of examples here, but just really think about the solution, how the connectivity is set up, stuff like application level backups, for example. We can talk to that a little bit later on in this session, and day 2 operations and all of that stuff that you need to think about. Again, just to get your mind thinking about all of these things. In the end, it helps to do the design work as well. So note down your high-level design, right? What on-prem data center want to migrate to what regions? The number of SDDCs that I just got back from Sizer, for example. That availability, the stretch clusters using multi-availability zone approach. Stuff like that. all the way to the logical and the physical design here, because in the end, well, we need to think about how to set up our SDDCs, what storage policies to use. That depends on the instance type as well. Do I have NFS data stores? Do I use vSAN? What subnets do I want to use? What AWS account? Because whenever you set up an SDDC, you have an AWS, a customer managed AWS account that you need to use as well. Stuff like that, firewall rules, initial management access, all of that, you need to really think through. And once you have that in place, we can now move ahead to building and migrating the actual workloads. So for those not familiar with VMware Cloud on AWS, this is just a screen grab from our VMware Cloud and AWS console. And this is where you set up subscriptions. This is set up where you set up your SDDCs. And it is as easy as that. No longer do you need to go through all the hosts, install ESXi, install vSAN server, and do all of that. No, this is all automated for you. So you fill in an SDDC name, you pick your region of choice, where you would see a complete list of the world map and the regions we just had in an earlier slide. You can check stretch cluster if your SLA and your RTO and stuff requires you to do so. You can pick and choose the host type, like I mentioned, the number of hosts, hit next. Then you set up that AWS account we just talked about briefly. You pick and choose your VPC and your subnets, configure your management subnet, and review and acknowledge and hit deploy. It is pretty straightforward like that. And depending on your region and your configuration of your SDDC, within an hour, 2 hours, maybe, you have a full-blown SDDC ready to go, right? So it's ready to host workloads. It's ready for connectivity to be further configured. It's ready to for workloads to be migrated to. It's that fast and across the globe. Doesn't matter if you instantiate an SDDC in India or in the US, it will be really fast and ready to go for your workloads. Now, a quick overview of some of the connectivity options that we have. The first listed here is Direct Connect, and this is an AWS service. And really, you can see this as a layer one or a dark fiber in between your on-prem data center and VMware Cloud on AWS, the region of choice where you deployed your SDDC, or could be instead of an on-prem data center, an office, for example, right? It allows for high bandwidth. There's options there, but maybe even more important, it allows for a consistent latency between source and destination here. We have other options. If you connect over internet, we can use VPNs, either route-based or policy-based VPNs. This is all configured in the NSX Manager that is part of the cloud, or accessible through the cloud console we just showed. And the route-based version, you can actually have that as a backup to your Direct Connect as well. So pretty there's definitely some options to choose from. HCX, we'll talk about HCX in a bit in more detail, but this can create an overlay between those existing network connectivity options. And it comes with a ton of options as well, but that's more the migrations options, migrate options that we'll discover now. So you're ready to go. You need to think about how to migrate my workloads from source into VMware Cloud on AWS. Now, HCX, short for hybrid cloud extensions. This is our most sophisticated tool of doing cloud migrations because it allows customers to orchestrate, to automate, to schedule. There's a lot of options in HCX, and we'll show HCX in the upcoming demo later on as well. Part of HCX is also the ability to live migrate workloads. And whenever we talk about live migrations, there is vMotion logic being used. vMotion obviously being the technology that allows workloads running on top of VMware, on top of vSphere to be live migrated. So application, the VM remains powered on. There's no interruption in the availability of that VM and its guest OS and the application. Really strong technology that allows us to do really easy migrations. Another version of that is the advanced cross vCenter vMotion. That is something that I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper. So I have a couple of slides on that as well. VCDR, VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. Yes, obviously it's a DR solution, which is a great solution, but you could misuse it, air quotes, to actually move and replicate your workload from on-prem into VMware Cloud on AWS. And last but not least, the content library. Not really a migration, but it does allow for using the same ISOs, the same templates that you have on-prem, your customized templates to instantiate new workloads on VMware Cloud on AWS as well. Because in the end, VMware Cloud on AWS is just a vSphere environment. So we have a vCenter instance, you have a vCenter instance on-prem. If you have a content library, you can publish that one, subscribe to it from the AWS side of things, and deploy templates, deploy workloads using the templates that your company already has and approved. Looking a little bit closer to these into these methodologies, we already mentioned vMotion with being a live migration, a hot migration, if you will. And you see HCX is capable of doing that. HCX is capable of doing all the methodologies here. Because of warm migration, that is where we replicate the virtual machine data and we have a cut over moment. So there is downtime involved. Depending on how you migrate, might be a short downtime, but there is downtime. And a cold migration, that is really where you power off a virtual machine, you move it over and you power it on again, right? HCX, just to showcase that this is by far the most versatile solution here. So taking a little bit of a closer look into HCX, this is what it looks like. There's tons of services and features that comes with HCX, and I wanted to highlight that we have both the advanced and enterprise version. For VMware Cloud on AWS customers, there's nothing to worry about because the enterprise version is shipped into the subscription. There is no option. This is what is capable. This is what VMware Cloud on AWS subscriptions are capable of doing. And especially network extension and the high availability option here are some features that we really want to utilize for large-scale migrations, together with, for example, mobility optimized networking. We'll show what that looks like in a bit. So once you have deployed an SDDC, you can then enable HCX. What that will do is it'll install a virtual appliance, the HCX Cloud Manager on the right-hand side here on the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things. This will allow you to download and install a connector on the on-prem side of things. And you create an interconnect between the two. Then you create a service mesh containing compute profile, networking profile, basically letting HCX understand, okay, these are the data stores and networks that I have on-prem versus what I have in VMware Cloud on AWS. Then once that service mesh is actually created, you'll see a couple of virtual appliances pop up. So we have the interconnect appliance on top here. If enabled, you have the WAN optimization appliance and the NE, the network extension appliances. Now you see one on each side, but today we can instantiate more network extension appliances. And by doing so, creating an HA layer, high availability layer, over the network extension appliances. I'll show you that in a bit in real life. HCX is really good in just filtering down through your VMs, through your workloads, and create these so-called migration waves. And within these mobility groups and migration waves, we can define the way of a migration, right? We'll again show you that in the upcoming demo. We can also schedule against a mobility group. So a lot of freedom of choice in how you orchestrate and schedule your migrations here. Now, the other option that I quickly mentioned is the advanced cross vCenter vMotion, short XVM, because saying advanced cross vCenter vMotion a lot of times is not that convenient. So XVM, this is built into vSphere. And again, vSphere is just what is running on VMware Cloud on AWS as well. And this we can use to both import from the destination. So we import virtual machines from the source or push out from the source into destination. And what it really is, it's a live migration between two vCenter server instances that are in completely different SSO domains. So in this case, we could have VMware Cloud on AWS as a destination where the source is just any vSphere infrastructure and any, I should say, vSphere 6.0 and update 3 and up, because that was when we shipped the API for this into the vSphere product. The UI integration is there as of vSphere 7 update 1C. So automatically, if you're on VMware Cloud on AWS, you'll be using the vSphere 8 bits probably by now. So it's automatically included into the vSphere client, and it allows you to do really lightweight migrations, a really easy way to quickly do migrations. This is what that looks like. If you hit the cluster and then right mouse click, you see import VMs. You might have seen this already or used that already. You can connect to a vCenter server. So yes, you do need connectivity between source and destination, obviously. Even if you have your ESXi hosts running on a fully qualified domain name, you might want to do something about DNS as well. But if that is set up, it's really easy to just connect to the target vCenter server. If you have already set up that connection within your user session of the vSphere client, you'll see saved vCenters as well. And then you can just select bulk migrate or just select one VM to migrate, to live migrate. And it can be either powered on or powered off VMs, no combination of the two. But you can do multiple iterations of a migration as well, right? Other than that, that's just your regular vMotion wizard, and it will take some while, have that cutover moment, but a live migration using that capability. Now back to HCX, because that is our most sophisticated way of doing things, right? So we have some demos prepared for you. Well, not really prepared. We have the lab set up for you because we'll go over them live. What we have in the first step is our on-prem vSphere data center in Santa Clara, California. And we have our US West 2 VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. Now I have a direct connect in between the two where I created a layer 2 extension using HCX. So I'll show you that. After I'm done, Sean will take over and actually walk you through how to do a cloud-to-cloud migration. In that specific case, we have a connection over the internet with just Ireland and North Virginia regions for VMware Cloud on AWS. And we can do the same thing just to showcase you how easy it is to migrate, because again, it is just vSphere running on top of AWS infrastructure. So with that, let me stop sharing this and move over to my lab. And we were just discussing this before this session. It's always fun to do live migration. Sean, if you will, can you see my screen just to check? All good? Awesome. I like it. See, this is not the first time we're doing this, although it feels like it. Okay, so this is my lab environment here. I have my on-prem vSphere infrastructure here, and I already opened my VMware Cloud on AWS side of things here. As you can see, we've seen the screen where you set up the SDDC, right? And once you have done so and the SDDC is deployed, you'll get the credentials for vCenter Server as well. You might want to think about some firewall rules, but in the end, you'll get your credentials, you'll log in, and this is what you'll see, just your typical vSphere client. Now, pardon me for looking a little bit to the right because I have the lab on another screen here. A couple of interesting things for those not familiar. In the first cluster of your SDDC, you will have a management resource pool. Like with on-prem, we need some resources for the management stack, vCenter Server, NSX, HCX in this specific case as well. So you see some appliances here. Customers do not have any access to this resource pool that is VMware managed. Now, the compute resource pool is where my stuff lives, right? So I already have a couple of workloads running here, a couple of desktops, SQL server, etc. But what I want to do is look at my on-prem side of things, where again, I have a management cluster, same thing. And you see that I also have HCX set up here and my workload cluster. So there is some workloads here. Once HCX is deployed, like I just mentioned, you'll have a plugin. So you can go directly into the HEX appliance, but hey, we have the HEX plugin enabled in the vSphere client as well. Now it'll take you through the dashboard of HEX here. So what we'll see once it loads, see, again, live demos here. What you'll see happening is that we now have created the side pairing between source and destination. I think it's probably, there we go. We'll wait a little bit for HEX to come alive. What I'll do in the meantime, and obviously whenever you want to switch to the other side, it pops up. There we go. It's a little bit laggy. Again, I'm in the Netherlands. This VM is residing somewhere in the West Coast, US. So there's a little bit of latency there. What we see here, we have a side pairing set up, already migrated some VMs here. This is that side pairing that I was talking about. Whenever you start, you have the deployed HEX, the manager and the connector, you set up that side pairing, and then you create that interconnect, right? We have the service mesh using the compute profiles, network profiles. What I wanted to showcase really quickly here is I have set this up with multiple network extension appliances. So you see the network extension appliance here and another one. And that allows us to enable HA management. So an HA group for HEX. Because if you are talking large scale migrations, right? And you create that network overlay for easy migrations without connectivity loss, because that is what you can do with the network extension capability here. What you don't want is to rely on one virtual appliance. Yes, we have vSphere HA. Yes, we have AWS infrastructure. So if a host fails, we quickly spin up a new one, and vSphere HA will take care of the appliances and boot them up again. But this is really saving you that hassle from connectivity loss. So that is something to keep in mind. What we did with that network extension is actually create one. So we have a network extension created for a specific port group. And that port group is just listed here as the source. This is just my port group name. In this specific case, I'm running a distributed switch on-prem. There is no need for NSX. That's no prerequisite to use HEX and migrate into VMware Cloud on AWS, where NSX is used, right? So if you have NSX on-prem, all good. If you just use distributed switches, also fine. This is my port group. This translates into another port group on the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things. You see that I'm using this HA pair that I just showed you, and I have enabled mobility optimized networking as well. Now, this is an interesting one because in this specific scenario, if I migrate a virtual machine, there is no specific need during the migration to re-IP that virtual machine. So I could just use the same network, the same IP subnet that I have on-prem, use it in VMware Cloud on AWS as well. Obviously, the gateway then still resides at that point on-prem. You don't want a lot of hairpin networking going on, hairpinning routing. And that is where mobility optimized networking comes into play, because it'll sort of mimic the gateway on the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things. It'll propagate the /32 of the VM, the IP of that VM that is running in that specific port group. So if we hit migrate, it is easy, and I'll just kick off some migrations for you here. The migration is always started from the source side of things when you do on-prem vSphere to VMware Cloud on AWS. Might be a little bit different cloud to cloud, but Sean will talk to that maybe in the extended demo here. What I wanted to showcase, okay, I have an app, Grafana app, for example. Let me just select those VMs, add them to the migration. I can give a name here, Grafana, and I have some mandatory stuff that I need to go through. So again, this is my compute resource pool that I want to use. I have mandatory storage with vSAN and the first cluster, including the management data store, which is the vSAN data store. A logical representation of that is the workload data store, and this is my vSAN data store that I need to use for workloads. Now, this is where it becomes interesting as well, because we have some options for migrations. vMotion we already called out. Bulk migration is interesting because it can push out a lot more concurrent migrations. vMotion is a little bit constrained with the number of concurrent operations that it does, but it is live. Bulk migration, you have a power on and a power off, or a power off and a power on moment, so a cutover point in time, but it allows for a lot faster migrations in one go. Replicated assistant vMotion, that is sort of in the best of both worlds. So if you still want a live migration, but you do have a large database or file server backend, Replication Assistant vMotion help because it can replicate the data set itself. Once it has convergence on the data, it can then do the actual vMotion of the compute bit and still have a live migration, even though you have a large data set. We'll go with vMotion. We select a schedule. You can define the start and the end of a specific workload migration. In this specific case, I don't mind so much, so I'll just move ahead and start migrating as soon as possible. But this comes in handy, obviously, if you need a specific, if you have a specific migration window where you need the migrations to happen. There's a couple of options here for the switchover, extended options. I'll just quickly show you that. I think upgrading virtual hardware is interesting, especially with the new M7i instance. You want to upgrade to the latest and greatest there. And we are basically set to go. So we can hit validate, see if I did everything correctly, and it actually is. Now, because this VM is residing in the port group or using the network port group that is part of the network extension, what you'll see here is that automatically HEX sees that and translates that into the workload, into the data store that we have on the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things. So that comes in handy. We don't need to pick and choose per VM what we need for a network. What we can do per VM is define the migration info and some other details, right? So the options here, those are for all the VMs in this selection, but if you need to do a per VM setting, you can do so as well. If we hit go, the migrations will start in a bit. We chose vMotion. What we can see on the tracking side of things here is the VMs to be migrated. So you see some information here. Eventually, they'll show up. For the sake of the time, we don't want to wait around for those vMotion operations to be completed. But if they are migrated, they are still using that same IP address that they have right now. Right, so the Grafana app that was one. This specific IP address that is part of that network extension that we created. Right, so that is key to understand. In the link that we'll share later on, we have this exact demo, and you actually see a ping running next to it as well, and you see that the vMotion cutover is really quick without any connectivity loss. Right, maybe one ICMP packet that got lost. So really strong tooling here and easy ways to do migrations here. Sean, I hope I'll let you have enough time here. So why don't you take it over and show us the cloud-to-cloud migration?
Sure, happy to. So what I'm going to show you now is you may see something similar to what Niels just showed you. So what I have in my lab here is I've got a network extension and a interconnect going from Ireland, to Northern Virginia. But this is just going over the internet. What will be different when you go to deploy a cloud-to-cloud deployment is you will deploy the HCX manager as a part of your SDDC deployment on both of these SDDCs. And then you will log in with what's called a cloud admin role. And then you will use that cloud admin role to pair these two SDDCs together and then create those interconnects. One thing that you will see here is these arrows are going both ways. That's because we've opened up interconnects to go from Ireland to Virginia and then from Virginia to Ireland because our sources may be different. So we're allowing in this lab here to be able to move those VMs bidirectionally. Network extension, Niels already went over that, so I'm not going to cover that because we have them set up. We have 4 set up in our lab, It's not any different as to how you do that in HCX, whether it be cloud to cloud or from on-premises to a cloud SDDC. That network extension step is going to be the same. You can see here that we have 4 extended. One of the differences that you'll see is I'm actually using the HCX tab versus the plugin. There's no particular reason why, other than to fully configure HCX, you need to go through the HCX portal. So because Neil showed you the plugin, I figured I'd show you what the HCX side looks like. For example, this is a managed service. Because it's a managed service, I see here that this software update is available. I can still patch this to my choosing when it's convenient for me and my team, but we will send you updates to let you know that, hey, there's a new version available. You can go download it, deploy it, and update it when it's convenient for you. As we go into the migration pieces here, I'm going to select a VM. Let me move my bar here so that I can actually see what I'm doing here. So as a part of these SDDC deployments, when it's cloud to cloud, one of the things that you'll have an option to do is create what is called an SDDC group. When you create an SDDC group, you have the option to pair SDDCs together. As a part of the pairing, you'll actually get what may look familiar to some of you like it's a hybrid linked mode, in that I have 2 SDDCs that I can actually see here. The 52.13 is in Ireland. The 3.228 is in Northern Virginia, but I can see the inventory of both through this SDDC group creation that you see here. I've got an HCX demo folder here, and I've got 2 VMs, VM1 and VM2. For the sake of the demo here, I'm going to migrate VM1, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start pinging VM1 right now. And so you can see that the pings have begun, and you can note the milliseconds, and Niels, if we have time, we'll go back to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to migrate, and I'm going to migrate VM1. The steps that we do for a migration from cloud to cloud, because it's HCX, it doesn't change. The story doesn't change. It's still the same. And so once this inventory comes up, I'm going to also have to select the destination of the compute profile and all the other things that you saw Niels do before. I'm just going to search for HCX, and I'm going to go to VM1. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to add it. And then, as we saw earlier, everything stays the same. I'm going to throw this to the compute resource pool again. The storage. One thing that we have here in this demo, you can see that we also have FSXN. If I wanted to move this VM to that resource pool, but attach it to that supplemental data store inside of FSX, I could. For the sake of the demo, I'm just going to use the workload data store that on the onboard storage there. I am going to choose a vMotion. One of the things that Niels also talked about around the different options that you have for vMotion is if you use a bulk vMotion, one of the cool things that a lot of customers use is a part of the bulk. Niels mentioned seeding. We'll seed that VM, but once the migration is done, if you do a bulk migration, we leave a copy of the original VM sitting inside of vCenter, but the VM is turned off. What that means is if you bring your VM up on the other side and for whatever reason it's not working as you hoped it would, you can then power off the VM that's on the SDDC side, and then you can power back up that original VM to see if there's anything additional that you need to change to have that actually work. And so many customers use that bulk migration because there's I won't call it a fail safe, but there's a little bit of a protection there because you can keep the original state of the VM turned off, but in your inventory should something happen. Niels already went into, as a part of the move here, that layer 2 extension. I'm moving it over to layer 2 as well, because what we'll see here, time permitting, is we'll also see those ping numbers change, and that the pings will actually increase because we're going to see the VM go from Ireland into Virginia. And because we're still pinging across that layer 2 extension, the connection will persist. To Neil's point, we'll probably see one ICMP drop, but because we're not going to re-IP this VM, we can continue to ping that workload as it's moving. And like Neil said earlier, we don't want to go through, everything, because this does take a little bit of time, but you can start seeing events being kicked off here as a part of that as it collects those data. and understands what it's going to do for the move here. Niels, your migration's done. If they are, maybe we can go back to your screen while this one's moving, and we can show success on your end, or is it still moving?
It looks to be still moving.
Okay.
Somehow HEX doesn't comply with
Okay.
the hour that we have for webinars, right?
Okay. As a part of this, we've got a little bit of time. Is there any live Q&A that we would want to go through that you see here?
There were some questions. A lot of them are answered. If a customer has NSX on-prem, I think that's a good question. Which double checks should we do before deploying HEX and enabling network extensions? Great question. From an HEX perspective, it doesn't matter so much. What I would say is that because it just maps in the end the port groups being used, the network being used on-prem. What you could do if you have, with the latest and greatest version of HEX, if you have NSX-V still running on-prem, you could use HEX to do a V to T migration as well. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward, even if you have NSX on-prem as well.
So there's another fun one I think we could answer live from Ido. He says, are there any automation examples for HCX migration? Can I automate via RESTful API or Power CLI?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Short answers. Yes, we do have some examples. I believe they're found through that link. I'll share at the end as well. Because yes, you can automate against that, definitely.
And then since we're on that, Niels, let's talk about, is it possible to use IP customization in HCX in bulk migration? So I assume when you mean IP customization, we're talking about changing IPs as a part of that? Daniel? Right? So you can, right, Niels, and that you can do IP customization as a part of the move. You can change those IPs as a part of the process. I believe, Niels, one of the requirements, though, is VM tools must be installed and running, correct, for that to work?
Yeah, that is correct. That is correct. But yes, and to your point, bulk migration might be a little bit more versatile when it comes to options while being migrated. Obviously, at the caveat that you don't have a live migration, because, hey, but that's the beauty about providing options for customers, right? And we showed that you can choose per VM what suits that requirement best. Do you actually need a live migration? Do you need the options for bulk migration? Those are the things to think about. I'm not sure, Sean, if we still have the time to see this HEX.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
So I go back to the ping, and we saw that the ping earlier was sub millisecond. We can see now that VM is moved. You can see the large numbers up top, and now we're consistent around 70.1 milliseconds. But we can see that the VM is moving and it's migrated. If I go here in the vCenter in a moment, you'll see that this VM1 is actually not going to be there anymore, and it's going to move over. So you can see that these entities will move, but you did just see that VM move live. The ping's changed. And then if I go into this folder really quick, we'll probably see that it's actually here in the target. Yeah, so now HCX demo VM1 is now in Northern Virginia. So we've successfully moved that HCX, and the ping persists. So there we go.
Live migration, no connectivity loss. Sounds like a win to me.
Absolutely. So back to the slides.
Yes.
And we'll close it out with some additional things that you want to keep in mind around migrations here. So we've moved VMs over at this point, and that's all well and good. But now what are we going to do? Like, what are the additional options? What are some things that you need to consider? These are really the 5 things that you need to look at as a part of kind of what's next as far as your migrations are happening. Now that they're over there, you still need a way to monitor and log them. What are you going to do to be able to optimize those workloads? Where are you going to collect the logs from? It's kind of a rhetorical question. The answer is the ARIA suite, and we'll go into that in just a little bit. But the ARIA suite is really going to help you with that monitoring and that logging that you're used to doing on premises. We've also got audits and account management that you need to deal with. Monitor your access to the SDDCs. How are you going to secure those workloads? The distributed firewall that you get with VMware Cloud and AWS would be one great way to do that. As far as an audit standpoint, if there is an audit that is required, VMware Cloud and AWS can actually give you, some of our audit reports that you have access to, and you can share those with the people that you need to in order to pass those audits. Just because things are in the cloud doesn't mean you don't have to protect them. And it doesn't mean you don't need to back them up. You still need to do all of those things. So what are you going to do to protect the workload from a backup standpoint and a disaster recovery standpoint? We've got VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery is a really big win for us and customers using that. Those of you that have used VMware for quite some time are probably familiar with site recovery. Those are two options that you can continue to use with VMware Cloud and AWS. If there are other providers that you've been using on premises and you want to use that in VMware Cloud and AWS, we encourage you that you continue to work with those data protection providers to make sure that VMC will be a fit if you're using something different, some other third party. As far as the workload management piece, it's still about consumption. The beautiful thing about VMware Cloud on AWS is that as your workloads scale, so will the clusters, so will the host. And so as memory becomes constrained or CPU becomes constrained or store on-premises storage, meaning vSAN, on-prem on the host, so not on-prem on site, excuse me. Those hosts the SDDCs and clusters will expand because we need to make sure that the service is up. And so if you need to right-size those VMs, continue to use those tools that you're using today to right-size those things. And last but not least, it's those network traffic flows. Maintain and understand how those flows are going. We've got a set of tools that'll help you do that. And that's going to come with the ARIA suite. So as a VMware Cloud and AWS customer, you have access to ARIA automation, ARIA operations for logs, and others that are going to allow you to continue to manage the workload and understand what the capabilities of the software-defined data center is, because we want to continue to give you the tools that you need to be able to run in the cloud. ARIA is one way in which you can definitely get there. But as we go deeper into containers and microservices, if you're looking to deploy Tanzu at any point, VMware Cloud and AWS also supports Tanzu. And so if you're looking to do any, container as a platform or container as a service platform, anything that's leveraging Tanzu, such as Tanzu's Kubernetes grid, you can continue to do that on VMware Cloud on AWS as well. One of the things that I wanted to highlight here at the end is really a customer use case in Healthcare Leaders Group. Healthcare's Leaders Group or HLG is what I'll call them going forward. They do a lot of their growth in the healthcare space by acquisition, but as well as innovation. You can imagine with healthcare today, things are always evolving, things are moving at a very fast pace. And so HLG needs to continue to stay ahead of these technology changes. As a part of acquisitions, as they're bringing on that acquisition, the fastest way that they noticed to be able to bring them on board was actually cloud migrations and getting them into a service like VMware Cloud and AWS. So what they did is they set this really aggressive timeline to be able to move to VMC, to be able to get out of these data centers and shut some of these acquisitions down because they didn't need the space, but they wanted the workload. VMware Cloud on AWS is how they did that. The first 2 weeks that they took meeting with application owners and getting buy-in, it took them 2 weeks to move that first server. After that, it took them the remaining 4 weeks to move 68% of their workloads using VMware Cloud on AWS and HCX. What that did for them is it also allowed them to continue to innovate and accelerate that exit from the data center. It also kept their solutions active. One of the keys here is because HLG is a healthcare provider, HIPAA regulations to them are key. So they were able to persist that compliance as a part of their migration, which means that it was seamless in how they went about it. And VMC allowed them to do that because if you have HIPAA compliance, VMware Cloud and AWS can help you meet that. And what this also gave them is a future path to innovation. And what I mean by that is when you spin up a software-defined data center, you as a customer are going to create your own VPC that you own. And by activating the SDDC, you're going to create a VMware managed VPC. What we do on the back end as a part of these deployments is when you deploy a software-defined data center, you're going to actually deploy 17 ENIs into this customer VPC that you own. These ENIs or Elastic Network Interfaces is the vehicle that you're going to get access to these other AWS services that you see. It's not limited to these 6 that I've put here in this diagram, but these are what a lot of customers are using today. HLG, for example, is leveraging Control Tower to be able to manage their accounts. They're also using Systems Manager to be able to handle the patching of the VMware VMs. And so Systems Manager can do that for you. They also have connectivity desires back into EC2 that are running in other subnets and other VPCs, as well as managed database services like RDS. One of the cool things about this ENI connection is because it's coming through this peered VPC on the back end, this connectivity is not metered. So what that means is all egress and ingress charges, there aren't any. And so many customers are choosing to put AWS backup or other supported backup solutions into this customer-owned VPC. And now these VMware workloads are being backed up through this Elastic Network interface at no cost. And then that service is able to then back up that VM. So the low latency, high speed connection that is also unmetered has been a huge benefit for a lot of our customers as they go to modernize their workloads with AWS services. And then Niels, I know that we've got we've got a couple minutes left, but I know we've got some resources that we want to share here as a part of this as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned more information about everything VMware Cloud on AWS. The top link, that is probably your go-to link here. A little bit long, so the QR code here on the right side, that'll take you to that same site. As a subsite, we have some little bit more information about the M7i instance if you want to learn more. But the top link, that is where you go to have better insights on all the architectural stuff that is happening on the back end. The migration stuff that we talked about today, there's a migration tab on this landing page that'll show you the demo or demos that I was talking about earlier on as well. A little bit about the enriching of your applications. So there's tons of resources right there. And while we still have 2 minutes here, let's quickly go over some of the left Q&A. I see our colleagues have been busy answering.
There's some really good ones by Prashant. Can we have additional NSX edge routers with dedicated public IP addresses, which can help create a second AWS VPN gateway and define that second NSX edge router as a second compute gateway? He's getting really deep into architecture there. That's awesome.
Yeah, you want to take that?
I can take it, but that's going to be a deeper discussion, Prasant. You can deploy additional edge routers called multi-edge. There are going to be some limitations around that multi-edge router and how it is deployed. And then while we do support bring your own IP address, if that's something that you're talking about, we do support it, but that's a whole nother white paper that we have around that. And then we do have those compute gateways additional that you can deploy. But Prashant, we would really want to sit down with you and design that properly. The answer is yes, you have those as options. We would just need to make sure that the architecture that you're looking for is going to be supported with those options. But you can do BYOIP, you can deploy additional edges, and you can deploy additional compute gateways. We would need to kind of do a packet walk to truly understand if we can meet that requirement.
Great. I see there's some questions still left, but we are also on top of the hour. I see that our colleagues are busy answering those still. Let's take a look at, we have 3-1. This one was answered live. Well, first of all,
I believe we've got them, so we can't, since they've been put in the webinar, we should be able to take these and reply back if needed to the attendee, correct?
Exactly. We'll make sure we
can definitely follow up.
Exactly. Well, with that, let us wrap it up. We're 1 minute over here. I appreciate everybody attending this webinar. Hopefully this was time well spent and got you to learn a little bit more about VMware Cloud on AWS and how migrations are done. If you have any questions, find us online, maybe even on X or Twitter, what is it called nowadays, or LinkedIn. We'll be happy to answer any questions. So again, thank you for attending, and until next webinar.
Take care.